We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Good evening, viewers. Welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight on the show, I'll be talking about how smear campaigns are used as a tactic to discredit people. After earthquakes caused heartbreaking devastation in Turkey and in Syria, we'll meet the self-described researcher and expert whose apparent prediction of the disaster has sparked controversy. We'll be assessing whether there is any credibility at all behind the veteran journalist Seymour Hersh's headline-grabbing claim that the US bombed the Nord Stream pipeline. Plus, as always, a fantastic Great Britain and plenty of chat with my panellists Tom Buick and Andrew Eborn. But first, an update on the latest news from Tatiana Sanchez.
Neil, thank you very much. Good evening. It's 6 o'clock. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Home Secretary has condemned what she described as the appalling disorder during protests outside a hotel housing migrants in Knowsley on Friday. Suella Braverman tweeted that the alleged behaviour of some asylum seekers is never an excuse for violence and intimidation. It comes shortly after Merseyside police arrested 15 people aged between 13 and 54 following the violent protests. Security has been increased following the incident with reinforced fencing and a police presence. The UN aid chief Martin Griffiths has warned that the death toll in Turkey and Syria from Monday's earthquakes could double. His comments come as the number of dead in southern Turkey and northern Syria has passed 25,000. Despite the conditions, rescuers continued to find some survivors in the rubble, but they say the window is closing. Mr Griffiths says the UN will carry out separate aid appeals for Turkey and Syria in the coming days.
What happened here on Monday, the epicentre of the earthquake, was the worst event in 100 years in this region. We have a clear plan tomorrow or the next day to give an appeal for a 3-month operation to help the people of Turkey with humanitarian assistance. And we will do a similar one for the people of Syria.
Well, the Disasters Emergency Committee has raised more than £50 million of aid and support for victims of the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria in 2 days. Rabina Saeed from frontline medical aid charity UK Med says more are joining in the humanitarian efforts.
Ground are going to be providing a full Type 1 hospital facility, so that is providing primary health care to those who need it. So that's dealing with initial kind of trauma incidents, but then also secondary illnesses and diseases, people that might have left their homes without their medicine, families and children, so providing that primary medical support.
A man has died and a second remains in hospital following a double stabbing in East London. Officers were called to Hackney Wick at 4:30 this morning when the victims, both in their 20s, arrived at hospital with knife wounds. A 26-year-old later died from his injuries. Forensics teams are searching the White Post Lane area where the incident took place. So far, no arrests have been made. Well, an arrest has been made following a protest at a drag queen storytelling event for children at London's Tate Britain. Police say the person in custody is suspected of making a racially aggravated comment towards an officer. The protest broke out after demonstrators, described by some as far-right, clashed with others who'd gathered in support of the event. Now, with the search for missing mum Nicola Bulley now in its 16th day, her partner says he wants to keep all options open about her disappearance. Paul Ansell was speaking to 5 News. Lancashire police say they suspect the mother of 2 fell into the River Wyre, but no trace of her has been found. They're now focusing their search further downstream and out towards the coast. Despite this, Mr Ansell says his gut instinct tells him she didn't fall into the river.
Personally, I'm 100% convinced it's not the river. People don't just vanish into thin air. It's absolutely impossible. So something has happened. Something has happened. Find out what it is. I want every house, every garage, every outbuilding, the land scrutinised. I want it all searched. I want it all scrutinised. Every piece of it.
A British drug dealer has been arrested in Thailand after a 5-year hunt by the National Crime Agency. Richard Wakeling from Essex attempted to import £8 million worth of liquid amphetamine into the UK in 2016. The 55-year-old fled in 2018 before his trial began and was sentenced to 11 years in his absence. He remains in custody in Thailand and extradition proceedings are underway. The coronation emblem for King Charles and the Queen Consort has been unveiled. It was created by former Apple designer Sir Johnny Ive. It features an image of St Edward's crown, which will be used to crown the monarch, and was inspired by the King's love of nature. The emblem also includes the Rose of England, the Thistle of Scotland, the Daffodil of Wales and the Shamrock of Northern Ireland. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Neil Oliver Live.
The slow creep of ugliness into the language of public debate is impossible to ignore. It's a truly sad state of affairs, a degradation of the quality of discourse that should finally give us pause, make us stop and take a long, hard look at the reality presently being forced upon us. But the fact is we've grown accustomed to the knee-jerk application of lazy slurs and the smearing of reputations, to the casual abuse of those around us with some of the vilest accusations imaginable. Racist, sexist, misogynist, transphobe, anti-Semite. The list of tags is long. But just as the ceaseless printing of money has utterly devalued our currencies, so the machine gun spraying of labels, powerful labels once reserved for specific behaviours, deliberate crimes with malice aforethought, has rendered once lethally effective words all but meaningless. Even more worrying, the overuse and misuse of words distracts from real crime, real abuse, real discrimination. Real crimes of racism committed against people black, white and brown, for racism neither knows nor respects any colour bar, are lost in the haze whipped up by the ceaseless misuse of racist in relation to anything and everything. Sexist and misogynist are likewise bandied about with wild abandon, used almost without exception now for the purposes of silencing unwanted voices, frightening the faint-hearted back into their boxes. Real contempt for the female sex, made manifest, for example, in the coordinated wholesale rape of underage white working-class female children in towns up and down the country, abandoned to their fates by authority in its every guise, police, councils, judiciary, government, and entirely overlooked, blind eyes and deaf ears turned. The words that might rightly have been used to describe what was going on were made absent. Instead, all that greeted the news of all that evil and misery was state-sanctioned silence. Victims of the horror and those who knew about it and sought to raise the alarm and seek justice were shouted down. Those few actually brave enough to point fingers at the guilty were themselves labelled racists. That's the reality of where we end up when words are overused or misused. Paradoxically, real crime is left to thrive. Racist and misogynist are words with actual and precise meanings. Their use should sound alarm bells to alert us to real horror, real abuse, like that going on for decades in Rotherham, Telford, Oldham, and scores of other towns. That abuse of young girls has not stopped either, and won't stop while those who could and should be doing something about it find apathy and lack of meaningful concern and action less damaging to their career advancement and political ambition. More and more we live in a society in which keeping the head down or looking the other way feels to many like the only option, when to speak out, far less to do something, risks being carpet-bombed with the usual verbal abuse. Real misogyny is at the root, too, of the blatant and gratuitous misuse of transphobe as well. Men speaking up in support of women fighting to preserve the vital sanctity of women-only spaces, toilets and changing rooms, prisons, refugees and the rest, do not receive the full force of the transphobe label. In another example of misogyny, that insult, along with its even uglier twin, TERF, is applied most aggressively towards women. Transphobe, a word properly descriptive of aversion to and hatred of trans people, is therefore deliberately misused and ceaselessly and relentlessly, not to make easier the lives of trans people, but to shame, bully and dismiss women voicing concerns that only a handful of years ago would have been regarded as unquestionable common sense. All of this means real racists and misogynists can go about their brutal business almost unchallenged, while the once powerful and meaningful words, dread words, are pepper-sprayed into the faces of anyone and everyone seeking to ask questions of authority, to draw attention to dangerous societal misalignments, and to raise the alarm about overreach and mission creep. Verbal weaponry for use in emergency has been willfully and carelessly repurposed for one thing and one thing only, which is the silencing of debate. Most important to notice is the certainty that none of this is accidental, nor is it the product of a natural evolution of human behaviour. On the contrary, this choreographed and whipped-up name-calling, and let's face it, name-calling is what it truly is, deploying the oh-so-effective tactics of the school playground that none of us apparently outgrow, has been deliberately orchestrated and massively ramped up during the past 2 or 3 years of unprecedented change. It's been done on purpose, and the name-calling has been led and driven by government, by nudge units, and the rest of the little wizards tasked with the psychological manipulation and perversion of society. It really got going with anti-vaxxer, COVID-idiot, COVID denier and granny killer that became the round-the-clock stock in trade not just of government ministers, but most effectively in the mouths of familiar TV journalists and other media figures. As with racist, misogynist and transphobe, the panoply of pandemic epithets were the childishly effective bludgeon used to try and knock any and all dissent or downright disobedience on the head. As well as about silencing and controlling, it's been about division. Lockdowns and social distancing kept us physically apart, but even more sinister now is the way we're being set at each other's throats, fracturing and damaging the very fabric of society. Again, the ceaseless overuse of terms like anti-vaxxer rendered them utterly meaningless. People who had taken the products pushed as vaccines and been harmed by them, and then left in want of recognition, help and compensation, were routinely dismissed as anti-vaxxers, an allegation requiring exquisitely complex mental gymnastics in search of any sense whatsoever. Anyone questioning the claims as to the safety and effectiveness of those medical products is still automatically defamed as a COVID-idiot, or a granny killer, or a COVID denier. And yet, even though reams of peer-reviewed literature are out there now making plain the reality of harm and risk from taking those products, still the C words are bandied about. And again, as with the rest of the name-calling, it's all about silencing dissenting voices and seizing and maintaining control of narratives. The ugliness and attempted bullying is everywhere. Perhaps the granddaddy of them all right now, the Swiss Army knife of insults, is right-wing. Everyone and everything standing in defiance of the narratives about COVID, about the war in Ukraine, the so-called climate crisis, 15-minute cities, is instantly and automatically right-wing. Real old-fashioned right-wingers must be revolving like revolutionaries in their graves at the butchery of a term that was once upon a time actually descriptive of a political position. Fearing the loss of cultural and community cohesion in the face of mass immigration is automatically right-wing, as well as racist, of course. Brexit is right-wing. Love of country is right-wing. Gardening is right-wing and also racist. So too the English countryside and being good at maths. After a lifetime of skirting around politics, avoiding the whole sordid business like something left behind on the pavement by a passing canine, I got out of bed one morning a couple of years ago to find I was right-wing too, apparently. Not just old-fashioned, stick-in-the-mud, middle-of-the-road right-wing, mind you, but frothing at the mouth, swivel-eyed, ultra-far-right right-wing. I achieved this feat by not moving at all in any direction. I've stayed where I've always been, which is to say in the land of those cynical of politics and politicians of all stripes, and therefore politically homeless for a lifetime, while some sort of undetected shifting of the tectonic plates moved the old world out from under my feet and off into the distance, never to return. Articles about me in the newspapers used to describe me as long-haired and Scottish. Nowadays, I'm mostly known to the mainstream media as right-wing conspiracy theorist Neil Oliver. It's laughable, but there we are. I said right-wing was the granddaddy, or at least the catch-all, but of course that would be to overlook the many megaton explosive power of the A word, which is anti-Semite. Arguably as ubiquitous as racist, anti-Semite has an edge of lethal sharpness. To be labelled anti-Semitic is to be allegedly guilty of one of the oldest and ugliest sins of all. Last week, a piece in The Guardian raised the spectre of anti-Semitism, political journalist Peter Walker nudging it as close to me as he dared after I spoke on this channel about the erosion of the 1,000-year-old British Constitution by one parliament after another. It was quite a leap, I can opine that much, but then you'd expect some convoluted reasoning from a social justice-obsessed newspaper. It was also imaginative dot-connecting to invite readers to infer anti-Semitism from a monologue about the British Constitution. But there you go. It appears anti-Semitism nowadays, like sexism, misogyny, transphobia and far-right politics, is in the eye of the beholder. Here's the thing. As I said at the top, ugliness, unspeakable ugliness, has slithered into our public discourse like sewage from a burst pipe. It's been no accident, rather a deliberate campaign based upon application of the oldest and most childish tactic in the book, that of baseless name-calling, to shore up the defences around official narratives that are collapsing like sandcastles in the face of an incoming tide. In the process, once important and precisely descriptive words have been utterly compromised until they mean everything and also nothing. After all, if everyone is a right-wing misogynist anti-Semite, then no one is. Just as they tried to distract us from the erosion of our liberties right under our noses by fear porn and nudge units, their lockdowns, face masks, forever war and climate crisis, so we are losing sight of real crimes of violence against women, abuse and discrimination on the grounds of race and the persecution of ancient faith and culture. The truth is that we are over this now. We've had a gutful. We've seen the attempted manipulation, the wordplay and the rest, and we're not fooled for a moment. Words matter at the deepest level of our relationships with one another. Our language is what makes us human and makes possible our society and civilization. We must reclaim the words, like everything else, and keep talking sense to one another. And at the end of the day, if we must be back in the playground, again, there's this. Sticks and stones may break our bones, but names will never hurt us. All of that, as always, is my own opinion, of course, and feel free to disagree with every bit of it, or in part. Keep your tweets and emails coming all through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me as well, @gbnews, and I'll try to get to comments later in the show. I'm joined tonight by the podcaster and education specialist Tom Buick and the broadcaster and lawyer Andrew Eborn. Thank you both. Great to have you. Tom, name-calling, smears and slurs. Am I paranoid, or are they really out to get me?
Name-calling is as old as ancient Greece. I think it was Plato who said that no one likes the man who speaks the truth. And the fact is, on many occasions, I've had the pleasure of sitting on the show listening to many of your monologues, and you have been ahead of the curve often in public debate, whether that's about the vaccine, whether it's about the impact and dangers of lockdown. So it's not surprising. There are people out there, when you speak truth to power, they don't like what they're hearing and they're going after you. As you say in your monologue, Neil, it's become increasingly in our society no longer a debate governed by civility, of those Enlightenment values, of being able to agree to disagree. It feels to me increasingly we're in a world where it's the imposition of narratives, the battle of narratives, whether it's on the right, the left, the centre, or none of the above. And look, I've sat on this sofa on many occasions and I've delivered a bit of a tough love message to you about some of the things you've said. I don't agree with everything.
And rightly so.
You say, I mean, frankly, there are some of your monologues, certainly some of the more recent ones, they have a kind of end of days feeling about them, quite doom and gloom. And I've described myself to you before as a rational optimist. And I'm frankly quite fed up across the whole spectrum at the moment, whether it's the so-called wokeists or the anti-wokeists, of narratives that are emerging that are essentially about these end of days. They're doom and gloom. As an ordinary voter, an ordinary citizen, I want to listen to hope. I want to listen to, well, how do we reshape this society after the biggest pandemic after 100 years? How do we deal with the scandal of food banks? How do we make sure young people have got access to housing? Now, our politicians aren't answering those questions, and you've been right to raise that. But equally, I would say to you, Neil, sometimes, as Plato himself said, rhetoric does not come without consequences, and you need to be accountable for the things that you say on a national platform like GB News.
And I happily am, but scurrilous name-calling, I do draw the line at when it's misapplied. Andrew, do you think that we can, as Tom rightly suggests, look for optimism if we don't, first of all, take out the trash, including dealing with the misuse of language? How can we talk our way to the sunlit uplands, which we have to do with ideas and debate, if it's been co-opted by those who would only...
You're absolutely right. And we always used to say that the word is mightier than the sword. But if you misuse that word, that sword is going to get blunt pretty quickly. And you give some great examples. I mean, the word woke in and of itself, when it first came about, was all about enlightenment. This is the road to Damascus. This is about respect for others and so on and so forth. That has now become a negative. And the more that you use words in a particular way, the more they're wrongly attributed. They say that a broken bone can heal, but the wound of a word can fester forever. And the power of words, as a lawyer specialising in intellectual property, the power of words is phenomenal. But when they're misused in this way, it does a massive disservice to the things that you're supposed to be right in this world. And I think that's the big problem. I think the name-calling as well, it's too lazy, isn't it, as you say in your principle. And it's P.T. Barnum, who, the great showman, who always used to say, if you want to draw a crowd, start a fight. And what better way of starting a fight than to name-call? I mean, that's how it's happening, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm absolutely fine with being challenged.
Yeah.
And I will take the consequences for what I say if people engage with the argument. But when I was making a point last week about the erosion of what I see as the freedoms and rights enshrined in the Constitution, and I was making the point that it had been one parliament after another for decades and centuries, that invited a journalist to infer anti-Semitism. I think it's a step too far. That has to be pushed back.
No, that's absolutely outrageous. And look, as someone in my political background that has campaigned against anti-Semitism, I mean, I resigned from the Labour Party as a councillor in 2018 because of the poor way in which the party was handling anti-Semitism. I can tell you this, Neil, I've sat on this sofa, I know your work, I've read your works over many, many years, and, without a scintilla of evidence, does anything that you've ever said meet the IHRA definition or any other definition, frankly, of anti-Semitism. So let's just get that out on the record. But what really concerns, because you talked about it in terms of name-calling, actually, we're also entering a new phase in this sort of debate post the pandemic, where it's sort of guilt by association. I mean, you're right, you spoke to the issue of 1,000 years of unwritten constitutional history, but you know it well as a historian. But, of course, the people on social media are jumping on the affiliations, which may or may not have anything to do with you and your associates, as being somehow conjecture as to anti-Semitism. Now, that's wrong, and I think that needs calling out.
Sure thing. And we will be coming back to this topic after the break. Dr. Tim Luckhurst will be here to discuss my opening remarks further and to talk about the importance of media regulation as well. See you shortly.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back, everyone, to Neil Oliver Live. Great to have you there. I opened the show tonight by talking about the way in which smears and name-calling have become principal weapons in the war waged against free speech, as I see it. How are we to hold our leaders' feet to the fire, I ask, when to challenge the orthodoxy is to invite routine accusations of racism, transphobia and anti-Semitism from elsewhere in the media world? Joining me now to help me gauge the temperature of the conversations going on out there is free speech advocate, Professor Tim Luckhurst from Durham University. Good evening, Tim. Thank you for joining me this evening.
Pleasure to be with you, Neil. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Tim, it's my contention, obviously, that labels like anti-Semite and racist are just bandied about casually and to such an extent as to be meaningless. What do you think?
I don't think that these phrases are bandied out quite as wantonly as you say. And of course, anti-Semitism is a vile prejudice and one that I'd condemn entirely. But I do agree with you, Neil, that language is being used in an irresponsible way. It's used to stigmatise views which people find unpopular and to stigmatise views which are not deemed to be mainstream. And that's regrettable because we only have a civilised debate in this country, in our democracy, if debate is conducted in a civilised way which reduces passion and introduces light. And I'm all in favour of light, enlightenment, of ideas being explored in an open way, being debated in such a way that people learn rather than learn to hate each other.
It particularly troubles me, Tim, that it's not just anonymous keyboard warriors pumping out their bile from their mother's basements, but it's professional journalists, in some instances, who are going across the line, as far as I'm concerned. What do you make of the climate out there in the town square, I suppose, where we all exchange ideas, but in terms of those that are supposed to be shaping the debate and giving it a structure, how do you gauge the temperature?
We've got some fantastically good newspapers and fantastically good broadcasters in this country. I think sometimes we forget the distinction between them. Broadcasters are required by virtue of their regulation, to be impartial, to be objective, and to be fair and balanced. Newspapers are ideological constituencies, and it doesn't surprise me that ideological constituencies defend with great passion, sometimes with a little bit more than passion, the views of their particular readers. So it doesn't surprise me, for example, that The Guardian will attack people whose views it disagrees with, any more than it surprises me that the Daily Telegraph will attack people whose views it disagrees with. The Daily Telegraph tends to attack people who come from the left. The Guardian tends to attack people that it regards as coming from the right. I do think you make an interesting point, though, Neil, that views which in the past have not been described as right-wing or left-wing, rather perhaps as simply minority views, are routinely castigated and stigmatised today as right-wing. And I agree with you as well that the term right-wing has ceased to be a description of someone who comes from a conservative background and become a means by which we insult and stigmatise people. I don't regard myself as being remotely right-wing, but then I think being right-wing means being a conservative, and being a conservative is a mainstream political position.
Andrew, do you feel cowed at all? Do you hear yourself not engaging in certain debates, getting involved in certain topics, simply for fear of having some sort of slanderous...
It is interesting, isn't it? Because, as you say, a lot of the words being castrated, even that word, you know, you work on that sort of basis, the real meaning's being taken out. I don't, personally. I think I will always try and look at an alternative view in any conversation, more light, less heat. But we need to have a platform where things can be debated without fear. And some of the subjects that you touched on, people are scared to discuss them because they're scared for their lives. They've received death threats if they have certain views. And I think what happens is by abusing, it is an abuse of certain phrases in the wrong context. It devalues where you're calling out a certain injustice. And you highlighted several in your opening piece. And I think that's the problem. You're losing the power of words as a result of abusing them.
It is a fundamental, isn't it, Tom? I mean, I know that you and I broadly see you eye to eye on, I don't know, 2/3 of everything. But do you agree with me that if we don't establish the proper use of words so that we can have a conversation where we understand those ground rules and we understand what words mean, it becomes almost impossible to re-engage optimistic concepts?
Yeah. But what we always fundamentally agree on, Neil, is free speech. And the definition of free speech is the absence of fear from arbitrary persecution and arrest. Now, there are societies actually call themselves democratic around the world who do engage in arbitrary persecution and arrest, and political dissidents are shut away and not heard of for years. Britain, thankfully, is not that kind of society. But it's absolutely right that you and others, we are all always on our guard against those who would take those basic fundamental freedoms away. And my view is that's what you as a broadcaster and a journalist have been talking about on this show since its inception.
And it's always freedom of speech, but it's not freedom from consequences.
It's not freedom of abuse,
Tim,
absolutely not.
Tim, if you're still with me there, how do you rate Ofcom's performance over the past couple of years? Because I don't accept that they have created a level playing field. I think their preoccupation is with making sure the government or the orthodoxy is always being heard, and they only insist on a counter voice when the orthodoxy is challenged. I think you can trot out the orthodoxy to your heart's content, but there's an obligation on us here, say in GB News, that if we air a contrary voice, we have to immediately bring on the orthodoxy.
Well, I think that you're overstating your case, Neil. Ofcom, in my opinion, does a reasonably good job of maintaining balance, impartiality and fairness in British broadcasting. And I think that the very fact that you can have the animated conversation you're having now and that you have regularly on GB News demonstrates that Ofcom is not seeking to silence dissent or to prevent people talking about ideas which others might find unpopular or unpalatable. I think we can debate those issues. I think a much bigger problem problem in our society is the response on social media. Social media is a phenomenon which has changed our world quite dramatically. It's fair to say that the mob has always been passionate and abusive towards those it disagrees with, and that was as true of a 16th, 17th, 18th or 19th century mob as it is of a Twitter mob. It's simply that the Twitter mob is much bigger, and what it's imported into this country is a set of values which aren't actually British, because what we're encountering on social media is the dominance of American civil rights and, in some cases, extremist views, such as critical race theory. Critical race theory is actually based, for example, entirely in American evidence, and you can debate whether it's accurate in that context. It has absolutely no value whatsoever in Britain, because the evidence base upon which it is constructed is not a British evidence base. And yet the language of that particular theory and abuse of those who disagree with it has entered our public domain without any real awareness that it has no relevance here. That does worry me.
I take your point, and I wholly agree that a channel should be offering both sides of the argument. And we're on a two-way street, you know, on the output. But Ofcom, I would contend, doesn't mind a one-way street on other channels as long as it's a certain orthodox viewpoint that's getting that one-way street. The contrary voice doesn't have to be there as long as you're saying whatever. Vaccines are 100% safe, 100% effective, and they've saved millions of lives. There's no obligation to bring on a voice to say, hold on, I've got some questions about safety and efficacy. But the same is not true in reverse.
That's really interesting, Neil. I mean, I think what you may be doing is construing as the work of Ofcom what is in fact a culture encouraged by the staff of other broadcasters. I would agree with you that until recently, the BBC has had a problem with having a very, very substantial majority of younger staff who take a particular ideological position, making programme decisions which have tended to exclude certain parts of the argument. I think under the leadership of its new Director General and new chairman, the BBC has begun to address that challenge, and I think it's begun to do it rather well. It's begun to say, look, hold on a second, the majority of our young producers on the Today programme may think X, but that doesn't mean it's the only perspective, and they've got to put on guests who are prepared to challenge that perspective. I'm not certain that that's had quite as much effect as I'd like it to yet, but I certainly think it's happening. But I don't think it's because Ofcom has been telling the BBC, or indeed Channel 4 ITV, to do these things that they're doing them. I think it's because there's a culture within the institution which encourages what I would call a monotheistic mindset, and that it's really important that that monotheistic mindset be challenged. Perhaps Ofcom can play a role in challenging that monotheistic mindset. If it can, I would encourage it to do so, and of course you're right to say that it has the powers to do so. But I think it is mainly actually about the culture within the broadcasters. I'll be honest, if you are a right-of-centre graduate of a top university, you probably don't want to go and work for the BBC or Channel 4. You're probably more likely to get a job in the private sector and make money in the city. And as a result, there is a certain pool of people from whom the staff of such broadcasters are liable to be recruited. They need to work a little bit harder to perhaps recruit staff from the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph. How about that for an idea?
Very helpful insight there, Professor Tim Luckhurst. Thanks very much for joining me this evening. Got to go to a break now, after which we'll continue to look on in anguish at the devastation caused by the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. And I'll speak to an expert, a researcher, whose claim to have predicted the disaster has caused a fair degree of controversy.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone.
My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. As the death toll for the earthquake in Turkey and Syria passes 25,000 souls, and with warnings that that number could double, the sheer scale and intensity of the event is frighteningly apparent. The worst quake in the world for more than a decade, the worst in Turkey for a century. It measured 7.8 in magnitude, apparently, and levelled hundreds of miles of buildings and infrastructure. 2 days before it struck, earthquake researcher Frank Hugerbeets predicted via Twitter a 7.5 magnitude event in southern Turkey or northern Syria. But other seismologists voiced doubts about his methodology. Frank joins me now to discuss the complexities of earthquake prediction. Hello, Frank. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, Neil. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to see you there and to hear you. First of all, how do you go about predicting an earthquake?
Well, the specific tweet on 3 February was not an attempt to predict an earthquake, and I had no idea it would occur 3 days later. That was pretty much a coincidence, but it comes next to the forecast methods that we use.
But there's no denying that you at that moment in time, 48 hours or so before the event, you were predicting a significant magnitude earthquake in that part of the world, and it duly happened. But I can only imagine that it's an extremely complicated business, so many variables. I can't begin to think. What do you do? What's your methodology for predicting this type of event?
Well, first of all, the tweet, actually, the reason for me to tweet that information was the fact that there was some increased seismic activity, and on 3 February, there was a moderate earthquake, magnitude 4.4, very much near the epicenter 3 days later. And because of my research into historical earthquakes, I look at earthquakes in the past, and I look at the planetary positions at the time of the earthquakes. And so I can recognize when planets reach critical positions in the solar system, in the moon as well. And I know from that research that major earthquakes have occurred in that region in the years 115 AD and also 526. And both cases, there were more than 200,000 fatalities. It's unimaginable. And it has been a very long time since that region has been struck by a similar seismic event. And because of the moderate seismic activity, which I considered a bit of a seismic increase, I actually put out that tweet. And really that comes next to the planetary positions that we study to anticipate larger earthquakes.
So is it to do with is it the gravitational pull? Is it some collective effect, you would say, of planets, whatever, being in certain positions or alignments that increases the likelihood and the severity of tectonic and seismic activity?
I think the gravitational pull is a factor, but based on my research, I think that the electromagnetic force is much more significant in this respect. We have to realize that the electromagnetic force is about 40 times stronger than the gravitational force, and it also dominates the gravitational force. And I think that that is something that has been overlooked or neglected by the scientific community. They really consider the planets as non-influential, and I think that's a big mistake.
Yeah, it's obviously worth pointing out that other experts in the field of seismology and the rest aren't persuaded of your methods. I think there was some suggestion, I think in your tweet you said that there'd be an event sooner or later, and there was a suggestion that would be the equivalent of saying that after sunshine it'll rain sooner or later. You know, how would you respond to that? I think that the suggestion was almost that, you know, even a stopped clock tells the right time twice a day. You know, how would you respond to the suggestion that your accuracy here was coincidental?
Yeah, well, the focus was entirely on that specific tweet. And then there are stories about my Twitter feed that I put out these kind of predictions every day or all the time, which is certainly not the case. This was, well, it was the earthquake of the century, but it was almost also the tweet of the century, because I normally do not predict or say something like that for a specific region. Normally, it's more within probabilities, like the weather forecast, that we look at planetary positions, and let's say in the next 3 days can be critical. Like from 4 to 6 February, coincidentally, following the tweet was a critical time frame based on planetary positions, and these are based on our calculations. And yes, of course, there is a negative response to that from experts, but the problem actually is the experts do not look into the research that we do, and they don't look at the website. They have no idea what we are actually doing.
Tom, I would say I would be only open-minded about the possibility of there being a means by which populations and agencies necessary to help people in those situations could get prior warning. You know, I would say that you need to be open-minded and seriously investigate if there's any possibility that what Frank is suggesting is...
Absolutely, and I'm not a scientific expert on seismology or any of what we're talking about here.
An open debate.
But what I heard there about, and I'm assuming this is not disputed, that there was a 4.4 earthquake in that area on I think it was the 4th of February. That, to me, just rings alarm bells about, well, what were policymakers doing? Those responsible for citizens living in there's a well-known earthquake zone. I mean, there have been several earthquakes in my lifetime in that part of the world. And we also know that there was billions of pounds collected in additional taxes in order to support this kind of, in terms of advance warning, but also the disaster relief. And that's been very wanting, hasn't it? I mean, you can see that very clearly just watching the output from Turkey and Syria.
Frank, do you have any other predictions that you're working on at the moment? You know, is your attention being focused elsewhere?
We really do earthquake forecasts like the weather forecasts on a 2-3 day basis, and the next critical convergence of planetary geometry is on the 14th and 15th of February, and that's the routine thing that we do. But if we look a bit further into the year, there's going to be extremely critical planetary geometry, especially from August to November, that really stands out. And there is a real high probability of a megafrost earthquake, well over 8 magnitude, approximately from August to November. And of course, we will cover that in detail when we get there.
And where are you imagining, where are you predicting or seeing the signs?
At this point, because it's several months away, we cannot possibly do that. We actually measure the atmosphere. We look at atmospheric fluctuations, and we have that in a real-time feed on our website as well. People can actually follow that. And based on atmospheric fluctuations, we make estimates what regions could be next for a larger seismic event. It doesn't work perfect. It isn't perfect, but that's pretty much like the weather forecast in this from a scientific point of view. When they say there is a 50% precipitation probability, well, it may or may not happen. This is pretty much the case with our prediction model as well.
Frank Huger-Beets, I think what you're doing is fascinating, to say the least. And I wish you, I hope you'll continue with your work. I find it a fascinating concept. Frank Hoogerbeats, seismic researcher, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's another break, after which veteran American investigative journalist Seymour Hersh has made the startling claim that the United States bombed the Nord Stream gas pipelines. The Guardian's former chief foreign correspondent Jonathan Steele will be along to discuss it.
Tonight at 8 p.m, tune in to a GB News Investigates documentary as we tell the full story of the grooming gang scandal.
My childhood has been stolen.
We will expose the cover-ups that have kept this national scandal under wraps for decades.
Not one person has been held accountable.
Our investigation uncovers the true scale of this outrage.
I want to see senior officials held legally to account.
On GB News, grooming gangs, Britain's shame.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everyone, to Neil Oliver Live. Now, last week, a veteran US journalist alleged that the United States were behind the sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipelines last year. The multi-million-dollar infrastructure was deliberately damaged last September, with the United States and Russia each blaming the other. Now, a report by investigative journalist Seymour Hersh has it that the strike against the pipeline was ordered by President Joe Biden, a claim immediately dismissed as, quote, utterly false by a White House spokesman. Joining me to consider the claim and the denial is Jonathan Steele, former Guardian chief foreign correspondent. Thank you for joining us, sir. What do you make, first of all, of Seymour Hersh's article?
I think it's pretty convincing. The difficulty is it's only got one source. One would hope that there would be other sources, but he says it's a very reliable source, somebody who had direct knowledge of the operational planning of the attack. So that's fairly convincing. And then, of course, there's the statements by Joe Biden a few days before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. He said, if the Russians invade, there will no longer be any Nord Stream. We will bring an end to it. So he practically promised to destroy it.
So in that context, it wouldn't sound as though if there would be any need for a denial. It was a statement of intent that was there, and it was also echoed by Victoria Nuland, one of his senior diplomats. It was a statement of, if you do this, the following will happen.
Well, she expressed joy after the event. She told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I can tell you, like you, I'm very gratified that Nord Stream is now a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
Did it ever seem credible to you that Putin would destroy his own infrastructure when he could obviously just turn the gas on and off at will anyway?
That's the crucial thing. I mean, who does this profit, this destruction of Nord Stream? Not the Russians at all. They're the last people who profited from it. They wanted to increase their gas sales to Europe, get more money for that. They wanted to increase Germany's dependence on gas because they were the main consumers of the gas that comes directly by pipeline from Russia to Germany. So why would he suddenly destroy it? It's ridiculous.
Would it be fair to say that whoever blew up the Nord Stream gas pipeline was at war, is at war with Europe's economic security?
Well, I think that's why they're so busy dismissing it and denying it, because it is an act of war. It's an act of war by the United States against Russia.
Now, it's obviously worth saying for people that aren't familiar with Seymour Hersh, he's got a formidable reputation. I mean, he's not some Johnny-come-lately figure. He goes all the way back to the Vietnam War.
Exactly.
He broke the story about torture in Abu Ghraib. This is a serious and credible writer.
Yes, he goes right back to the My Lai massacre in 1968 in Vietnam. He discovered that the CIA was spying on anti-war activists, which forced the Senate to set up committees that looked into it and found it was perfectly true. He's got a very good record. As you mentioned, Abu Ghraib in Iraq, the Iraqi use of Iraqi prisoners by the Americans. So he's got a very good record. But he's an irascible sort of person. He's difficult to work with. He's a typical lone wolf.
Yeah, but
it doesn't go well in a newsroom.
But you want that, don't you? I mean,
of course you do. Absolutely.
You've got to have that.
How else is he going to dig? And you've got to risk offending people. You've got to be.
He's facing uphill struggle all the time. He's persistent. He's dogged, and he checks and checks and checks. I mean, he once said as a joke, "If your mother says she loves you, check it out."
Hilarious. To deal with one point, though, being so dogged as a journalist, why has he only got one source?
Well, I presume he tried to find other people. And maybe nobody was willing to, even though they were promised not to be on the record, nobody came forward. So, of course, if you want to be suspicious of his story, you jump on that point. There's only one source.
Well, I think it's keeping an open mind, isn't it? And you look at that sort of balance for the alternative views and say, well, why is that the case? Why is Biden denying it in the White House and so on and so forth?
And then the other argument that I use, who profits from the destruction of this pipeline? Certainly not the Russians.
Yeah.
And the Americans certainly do, because it's not just political. The Americans want to sell their liquefied natural gas to Europe. And big American corporations trying desperately to get more sales in Europe. Now they've got the main competitor knocked out of the business.
And isn't that really isn't that really the biggest story though here? Because the thing that I find really objectionable about Nord Stream 2, I mean obviously there's this whodunit challenge, but it's the fact that that second pipeline was signed up to by the German, Dutch and French governments after the annexing of Crimea in 2014. And I still think there's some serious questions that need to be asked about why, in a sense, Putin, having already been an aggressor, annexed a part of European territory from a sovereign state, that it was felt absolutely OK for EU nations to sign up to his second pipeline.
It raises a huge issue, the whole issue of economic sanctions and trade. I mean, do you cut off trade with the country because you disagree with
But again, Tom, I raise the spectre that whoever did it, whoever blew up the pipeline, wanted to compromise Europe's energy status quo. You know, it was there that because of the Nord Stream 2 potential, that Europe, Germany and whoever else had access to that Russian gas. Yeah. Whoever blew it up, and let's imagine Putin didn't blow up his own infrastructure, that just sounds ridiculous. Whoever did it wanted to destabilise that status quo. That's an even bigger question than yours about whoever cozying up to Putin's...
Yeah, but that's the view that I'm taking, is that actually the Americans are responsible. They've done us all a favour, because if this was a pipeline coming from Norway's gas fields into the heart of Europe, then obviously that would be a huge act of aggression. But
it's not an act of economic favour. We're now paying... America's gas has gone up in price since we ended up with no alternative but to buy it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but we should never be in a position where we were dependent upon Russian gas, particularly after 2014, when Putin had put his cards on the table and annexed a part of European sovereign territory, which, by the way, the big powers, including Britain, had given security to Ukraine that wouldn't happen after Ukraine had given up its nuclear weapons with the fall of the Soviet Union. I think that is just an absolute terrible geopolitical, diplomatic blunder on our part.
Trade with Russia just because of...
Well, I mean, I've heard this argument before, we should trade with authoritarian China because they might change their ways. We should trade... Actually, I think, we're in a new era of so-called deglobalisation where actually we need to look first and foremost to security of supply and industries and put that above some of these other diplomatic interests like trade and democracy.
From deglobalisation. And I think America will benefit from deglobalisation. But Jonathan, a last question to you just before the break comes upon me again. Why isn't this story being followed up?
Right.
Traditionally, something as big as this, and even the allegation, would be on every front page.
Well, that's a good question. It has been virtually suppressed by the British media. The Reuters news agency carried it, but I don't think any daily papers has picked it up at all. Maybe they think somehow he's burnt himself out. Seymour Hersh is no longer credible.
To dismiss it, really.
Sorry?
Reuters only covered it to dismiss it out of the mouth of the White House spokesperson.
Exactly.
I've got to go. Jonathan Steele, thank you so much for that insight. It's lovely to have you there, but I'm being oppressed by a commercial break. Coming up at 7 o'clock, this is Neil Oliver live on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. Plenty more to come tonight, and we'll start by discussing the phenomenon involving the sun, which has got the scientific community all of a flutter.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway...
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, welcome back to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight, on the second hour of the show, I'll be joined by an expert shortly to discuss remarkable news that a piece of the sun has broken away from its surface. I'm sure that's not really the right way to describe the phenomenon. I'll be talking to this week's Great Britons who walked from Birmingham to London to highlight mental health issues within the construction industry and to raise money for a departed friend's family. The former pop star Trey Lowe is also helping men to deal with mental health issues, and he'll be joining me in the studio to discuss his campaign. It's National Apprenticeship Week, and we'll meet a successful graduate who will tell us how much she benefited from her apprenticeship scheme. Plus plenty more from my brilliant panel, Tom Buick and Andrew Eborn. But first, an update on the latest news from Tatiana Sanchez.
Neil, thank you. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary has condemned what she described as the appalling disorder during protests outside a hotel housing migrants in Knowsley on Friday. Suella Braverman tweeted that the alleged behaviour of some asylum seekers is never an excuse for violence. This comes shortly after Merseyside police arrested 15 people aged between 13 and 54 following those protests. Security has been increased following the incident with reinforced fencing and a police presence. The UN aid chief Martin Griffiths has warned that the death toll in Turkey and Syria from Monday's earthquakes could double. His comments come as the number of dead in southern Turkey and northern Syria is nearing 26,000. Despite the conditions, rescuers have continued to find some survivors in the rubble, but they say the window is closing. Mr. Griffiths says the UN will carry out separate aid appeals for Turkey and Syria in the coming days. The Disasters Emergency Committee has raised more than £50 million of aid and support for victims of the earthquakes. In 2 days, Rabina Saeed from Frontline Medical Aid charity UK Med says more are joining in the humanitarian efforts.
We're going to be providing a full Type 1 hospital facility, so that is providing primary health care to those who need it. So that's dealing with initial kind of trauma incidents, but then also secondary illnesses and diseases, people that might have left their homes without their medicine, families and children, so providing that primary medical support.
A man has died and a second remains in hospital following a double stabbing in East London. Officers were called to Hackney Wick at 4:30 this morning when the victims, both in their 20s, arrived at hospital with knife wounds. A 26-year-old later died from his injuries. Forensic teams are searching the White Post Lane area where the incident took place. So far, no arrests have been made. Well, an arrest has been made following a protest at a drag queen storytelling event for children at London's Tate Britain. Police say the person in custody is suspected of making a racially aggravated comment towards an officer. The protest broke out after demonstrators, described by some as far right, clashed with others who'd gathered in support of the event. TV, online and DAB+ radio, you're with GB News. Now it's back to Neil.
Here we are together again for Neil Oliver Live. Now, imagine the surprise for astronomers last week when they realised part of the sun had broken off. If it sounds outlandish and impossible, it was certainly unexpected because nothing quite like it has been witnessed before, I'm told. Hopefully my next guest, author and space expert Dr. David Whitehouse, can offer us some reassurance about what it all means. David, thanks for coming in.
Hello.
Talk of bits of the sun falling off. It's all a bit terrifying. What actually happened?
Well, bits of the sun fall off all the time. I mean, they are called prominences. They are material that's thrown up into the solar atmosphere. They're cooler gas than the surrounding gas, and they're shaped by magnetic fields. And these prominences are thrown out into space, and they have hundreds of billions of tons of matter, which is a great deal. You see there one at about 11 o'clock, that prominence forming, hundreds of billions of tons of matter thrown into space. But first of all, that's trivial to the sun. That's unimportant. The sun is so big that this just doesn't matter. Why it is important, this particular flare, is this particular event was because it occurred at a high latitude in the sun. Now, the way sunspots, which are magnetic blemishes on the sun, the way they come and go every 11 years in a cycle is related to these events at high latitudes. So what they saw, this explosion happening, this prominence rise up, explode and scatter around, it acted as a tracer for the movement of gas on the surface, and we've rarely seen that before. So this was a pretty unique event in the sense that it allowed us to map the motion of gas in the sun's poles, of which has some clues as to where the solar cycle starts. But the actual explosion itself is a really reasonably common event.
Wasn't it the case, though, that what normally happens is that the material comes up and then just becomes part again of the mass? In this instance, did it not break? Did something not permanently break away from the surface? Is that not what happened?
Yes. What usually happens with these prominences is what these are magnetic structures, and they rise up through the sun's surface. And as they rise up, they fill with hot gas. So you see these loops, these magnetic loops, illuminated by loops of hot gas. Now, most of the time they'll fall down or just dissipate, but sometimes the magnetic tension becomes such, the magnetic fields become wound up so much, they collapse explosively, they heat the gas explosively, and it throws off into space. And what this one did was it threw the material back onto the North Pole of the Sun, and we learned something about the way the North Pole worked. But what often happens is that material is then thrown into space as a cloud of hot gas. And sometimes that can strike the Earth if we're all lined up in the right way. And that gives us the northern lights. That's when this material is coming down and hitting the atmosphere. But also it can cause radio interference. It can cause problems with electricity power lines. So solar flares, this solar weather on the surface, does have an effect on the Earth. And we do not know exactly what the sun could throw out at us, because there have been times in the past where, had it happened now, we would probably be in trouble.
Wasn't there the last significant incident was in the time of Queen Victoria?
You're quite right.
And it was an electromagnetic pulse. I don't know if I'm using the right terminology, but it partially fried the telegraph system, did it not? Which was the only high-tech.
Yes, you're quite right. This is the Carrington event in 1859, and it was an enormous flare on the surface. We haven't seen one like it on the surface since, and it threw out a lot of material, a lot of magnetic field, magnetic energy, which, because we were lucky at the time, the only electrical technology on the planet was telegraph lines. The magnetic field changing and wobbling induced currents in the telegraph lines, which electrocuted people. Nowadays, of course, we live on electricity, we live on power generation, we live on communications, and it would have affected us much more.
Well, I have mentioned this in the context of public speaking that I've done in the past, because it troubles me in my non-scientific way that we have so much invested in the cloud. You know, the server farms and all of the tech whereby everyone's life is remotely located in sensitive electronic systems. And an electromagnetic event on the scale of the Carrington event, are Google and Twitter and the rest of them future-proofed against what might happen?
Well, they say they are, in the sense that we broadly understand the parameters of the Carrington event, and that's built into the systems we've got at the moment. And since a lot of these information and storage facilities are distributed, then damage to one is not damage to everything. But as I said, we do not know what the sun could throw out on us. The Carrington event was unusual. Had it happened now, it would certainly cause a lot of damage. But we don't even know if the Carrington event is the best the sun could throw out, the biggest the sun could produce, because we've experienced the sun for only just over 100 years as an electronic society. So you're quite right to express fears that severe damage could be caused to what we take as normal and rely on due to solar weather.
It very much interests me that we live in a solar system. We know it and understand it as the solar system. And when it comes to, talk about the way in which our planet warms and cools, I don't think there's ever adequate consideration given to the fact that we live and die by the sun, which is 99% of the solar system. And we don't seem to fully understand what it's capable of.
Well, that's right. I mean, the sun is the energy for planet Earth. I mean, without the sun, nothing happens. It powers everything. It powers weather, climate, living systems, absolutely everything. It's energy coming from above. And we understand a great deal of it, but you're right, there's so much of it we do not understand.
It's fascinating.
It is totally fascinating. I mean, you talked about knowing the parameters of what happened in Victorian age. Are you worried?
Not particularly.
Why not?
Because I think this is statistics.
Right.
We have got plenty of time to prepare, to understand, and to future-proof ourselves, because such events like this, or indeed being hit by an asteroid, are going to happen.
Do you mean that we would see a Carrington event building before it happened? Would the warning signs be there?
But only a few hours.
Like your volcano guy.
So how do we prepare? In the terms of disaster movies, what do we do in the few hours that we get before the big one comes.
Well, if we had a few hours' notice and scientists monitoring the sun, which they
Switch
do,
everything off.
said, ground everything, switch everything off. They have plans to prepare that. But these events, as I said, like an asteroid striking us, they're going to happen sometime.
Right.
But they're unlikely to happen in our lifetime.
But people watching at home, so they're not frightened.
They shouldn't be
What
frightened.
should they be doing?
Well, if there was such a big event as this, there would be some notice. Basically, the only thing you can do at home is unplug everything. But because we've got fuses, it probably wouldn't matter much.
OK.
Of course, I'm worried about a mass extinction because this planet has had mass extinctions in the past due to asteroid activity. But I suppose
your broadband's going to go down.
Well, indeed. Well, as long as the price comes down afterwards, I don't mind. But in terms of what Elon Musk has been talking about, about essentially extraplanetary adventures, first Mars, but potentially on this issue, because after all, the sun is a star and it's due itself in billions of years' time to collapse like other stars do in the universe. Is there any future for humankind outside of the solar system if the technology were there?
You're quite right. The sun is a yellow dwarf, so-called main sequence star. They are known to be long-term producers of stable energy. They are good to live next to. We are fortunate. The reason we are here is because of our stable star. And we've got 5 billion years in the future, give or take a flare, 5 billion years of stable environment. But you're right, mankind wants a long-term survival in the universe. And who knows if we might last 100 years at a long.
Sure. So Elon Musk is right to talk about Mars, is he?
We would have to go out and live somewhere else.
Right.
The problem... Well,
Mars is what he's suggesting in 5 years.
The problem is if the sun dies and the Earth dies, Mars dies as well.
OK.
But in the short term, it's possible we could go and live on Mars, although Elon Musk's billionaire dreams are unfeasible at the moment. Because he wants too many people to go there too quickly. He talks about hundreds of people, millions of people living on Mars in 20 years' time. Now, that might happen in 1,000 years, but not in 20 years.
Well, he suggests 5 years, actually. It's quite a short period.
It's the thing billionaires do and decide.
The thing billionaires do, OK.
People in the sort of trade, so to speak, the technological trade, say that there are many reasons why he can't build a capsule to take millions of people to Mars, keep them alive on Mars, because Mars ain't the kind of place to raise your kids, as they say. In the trade, people say the toilet problem, because if you've got thousands of people in a spaceship, you need a pretty good life support system to keep everybody alive, to keep everybody protected, to feed them, to make sure they're alive when they get to Mars. Then when you get to Mars, everybody will die straight away because there's nothing there to support them. So he's got great dreams. He's revolutionising the exploration of space. But his billionaire dreams about going to Mars are a bit premature.
Is there a more feasible planet?
We're going to have to
No,
get into...
there isn't.
We're going to have to get into another break. I would just like to remind everyone that it is, of course, turtles all the way down. That's the real problem.
That's the problem.
Dr. David White, that was terrific. I loved that. I could have talked about that.
Absolutely. I love it. We're all off, but not to Mars.
I love it. Well, I've got another break upon us now, after which we'll be meeting a pair of Great Britons who have walked from Birmingham to London, highlighting men's mental health issues and raising money for the family of a dear departed friend.
Tonight at 8 p.m, tune in to a GB News Investigates documentary as we tell the full story of the grooming gang scandal.
My childhood has been stolen.
We will expose the cover-ups that have kept this national scandal under wraps for decades.
Not one person has been held accountable.
Our investigation uncovers the true scale of this outrage.
I want to see senior officials held legally to account.
On GB News, grooming gangs, Britain's shame.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree, that's what we like. I'm Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us, GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. We've just got time for some emails and other correspondence that's come in over the wires. Jeff says, once again, Neil, you have calmed me down. Often now I feel that I'm alone thinking many of the things you verbalise. It's great to know that there are normal people still out there. We have to keep sane in the knowledge that there's still a massive silent majority that are sane, but are just a bit quieter than the noisy nutters. Is Jeff's words, not mine. And Carol says, I do not normally email to shows, but I want to offer my support to you. I believe in free speech and support anyone's right to say what they feel is right. I listen carefully every week to what you say, and on the whole, I agree with you. I'm not part of the Twitter mob. I'm just an old-fashioned person, one of the silent ones. Please continue to do what you do. Honestly, we're running out of people who say what they think and challenge, which is sad. Long may you air your considered thoughts, my friend. I like Carol. Be like Carol. Let's move on now to this week's Great Britons. The construction industry. This shocked me. The construction industry has the highest suicide rate of any industry in the UK. On average, 2 construction workers take their own lives every single day in England and Wales. Well, my Great Britons tonight are committed to doing something about that and to bringing positive change to the whole industry. Stephen Kerslake and Dal Worcester join me now, I hope. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me.
Hello there. Hello, you're right.
Steve, first of all, why is there so much mental stress and emotional suffering in that industry?
It's a huge cocktail of just problems from all different angles. A hell of a lot of it comes down to pressure from the very, very top, and it falls down every step of the way, and obviously that rolls downhill. Pressure of working environments, so the weather, people working away from home, people working from all over the world come to the construction sector because it offers everyone a bit of hope. But one thing we do in the industry is we don't actually check the backgrounds of people who come into our sector. So I truly believe we inherit a hell of a lot of issues into our sector without actually giving people the general care that they deserve.
Is some of the trauma coming from the nature of the work itself and the nature of the reality of construction sites?
X amount of it, I believe, does. Personally, and from what a lot of people we witness, is a lot of guys on site see a lot of stuff on site And when incidents go wrong, whether it be fatal or just bad incidents, there's a lot of trauma caused on site, but that is never ever addressed, and we've unearthed that really from personal experiences. But then, as well as that, we inherit people from the military service, we inherit people from the kind of the prison service, we inherit people from Far Eastern Europe who have been through troubled backgrounds, and nobody actually turns around and says, "Should we actually find out if these guys are all right before they join our sector?" We just give them a ticket and they crack on.
And you mentioned people coming in from the military as well, and I know from working with support groups for veterans that post-traumatic stress disorder often takes 15 years even to actually come to the surface and to manifest. So I suppose if people are coming out of the army and then coming into the construction industry for a second career, they're bringing their own emotional trauma with them.
Yeah, we witness that day in, day out. We see a lot of people could be driving cranes, lifting large loads, moving materials around that weigh a hell of a lot. But what they've actually never realised is the guy driving the vehicle has never been checked, but his machine gets checked every day. So it's extremely, when you look at the actual the realism of how bad it actually is, it's horrifying, and there really is no control at the top of our industry to make sure that these checks are in place. We're kind of at the bottom of it. We're being told to deal with it and to look after each other and talk, but there's only so much talking we can do when we realise we're getting nothing else but pressure on top of us.
Shocking stuff, really. Dal, you're there, you're fireman, I believe, working in the fire service. Yeah. What's your experience of, you're in another, I mean, as if it needed saying, another highly stressed working environment?
Yeah, sure. I suppose the difference we have between the two industries is that we get a tip sheet, we know what we're going to and stuff like that, but from my experiences of incidents on construction grounds, they're not nice. It's not on your ledger of what you're going to be doing that day, and it is a traumatic event. So I've had incidents where people obviously died on the site, but they travelled in a minibus with a gang, if you like. Now this gang is now going home, one person down, and they're still expected to work the next day. And touching on the military side of things, military have what we have in the fire service, which is called TRIM, which is trauma risk management. But once you're out of that service, that TRIM no longer applies to you. So there's no follow-up of everything that you've experienced before. And that's what we're trying to promote within the construction industry.
And tell me, maybe Dal, you could lead off with it. Tell me about this walk and why it mattered and why it gave you signs of hope.
Well, for us, it was a challenge, putting ourselves into dark places, I suppose, and helping each other get out of it. But obviously, it was for a massive cause as well. We're all still in a lot of pain. But it was obviously, on our route, we were popping into HS2 sites, talking to members of staff there, sharing our experience. And it was kind of a good way to promote the charity that we're trying to run as well.
I think, Steve, I think when people if they think about the construction industry, I think there would be a perception that it's just big, rough, tough individuals that, and you wouldn't, I'd be right in saying that you wouldn't associate, or you wouldn't be invited to think that those would be the sort of people who would suffer that kind of trauma. But, I think, you've got, maybe perhaps tell us your own story, the evolution that you've gone through within the industry.
Yes, so we're pretty much, I always say to people that you might come across as big, tough guys, but we're the softest bunch out there. We're all put on this big persona of who we are, but I think the brotherhood that we kind of built this week between the team of us, of up to 10 of us, I think there was in the end, you come together as blokes and you realise you're all in this same boat together. But yeah, my story goes back probably, we're now 14, 15 years of troubles. Where I was involved in a sulfuric acid attack in 2008. That led on to post-traumatic stress, what was diagnosed a few years later. That led on to huge stomach issues that I developed. I had ulcerative colitis, I lost my stomach. And all this stuff happened. And when I'd done my own self-research, I realised that stress does everything to us. And we're realising now how many people are killing themselves in the construction sector. But the one thing we don't actually even take into equation is how many people are being killed by stress. We did this walk this week for a very dear friend of mine, Martin Guest, who passed away in December. He died of leukemia, and it's only over Christmas watching a few programmes and looking on it, and I've heard so many stories of people close to us in our sector who are having heart attacks early, cancers early, brain tumours early, and from what we're doing and what this pressure, everybody, the City of London is building, obviously the same as the UK, is going so quick, and money's coming in to develop our country, and our industry is booming. But when our industry booms like that, it comes at a price. And I think even when you look back at, say, the World Cup in Qatar, and everyone said the price and what that had on the people building it, it's happening on our doorsteps with the fact that us big soft men, or just big tough men, are actually very, very soft. And like I say, I'm very much one, to be honest, not to say let's talk. I'm all about being proactive. Let's go out and do something about it. Let's go out on the ground and be reactive, not be reactive, but proactive. There needs to be more done, and we desperately need more help. And there's a hell of a lot of money moving at the top, what isn't getting down to the bottom to support us.
Stephen Kerslake and Dal Worstett, thank you so much for your time. It's an unexpected direction, an unexpected source of a story. We hear about people in emotional stress. We hear about men needing to talk more about their feelings. But I think, to hear about it sourced in something like the construction industry, I was shocked by the statistics. So it's very much a scenario for Great Britons. I think the fact that you're taking time out from stressful lives and lives with stressful backstories to contribute, to give something back, and to lead the way to something better for your colleagues now and in the future. So thanks both very much. Great Britons both. Yes. Quite harrowing. Andrew, what do you make of that? Two men a day taking their lives.
Horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And it's important that they're talking about the industry. I know, same with doctors, same with lawyers, same with various other people in different professions. All credit to them. The more we can speak about these issues, the better it can help people. I want us to be the generation that speaks about mental illness, so the next generation doesn't suffer the stigma. And two Great Britons, as you rightly say, are doing very, very well to do that.
We don't seem to hear... We never seem to get to the end of it, do we, Tom? More and more we're finding out about men and women, but in this instance men, who are just miserable in their existences and needing help.
Yeah, well, what's great about that segment, not only the Great Britons that appeared within it, but again, it's another example of why GB News and this show exists, to actually shine a light on, frankly, stories that often are sort of unfashionable. This is about middle-aged men. You look at the terrible suicide stats. Actually, the age group that's most likely to take their own lives is between age 45 and 54. Men are twice as likely to take... men are twice as likely to take their lives as women are. And, of course, that invites then a discussion about the stresses and strains on men as breadwinners in families, often the shame and the guilt that men can feel if they can't provide for their families, or, if they... have certain addictions, alcohol and drug addiction and what have you. So, 6,500 people took their lives last year in this country. That's 6,500 too many. I think if we had the right support networks, it's great. Well, it's great what they're doing. There are lots of brilliant charities.
That film was great.
It was. It was, absolutely. And the important point is there will be people watching this show who are feeling depressed or whatever, and so on and so forth. There is help out there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that we can give appropriate links and so on and so forth to that sort of side. Talk to somebody about it. Get inspiration from those guys, because actually working on that sort of basis means that you could get the assistance you need.
I think anyone that hasn't had a day where they've just felt that they just can't go on, it must be in a minority of zero. Everyone. Yeah. After the break, musician Trey Lowe will be along to tell us about the platform he has set up to help men deal with mental health problems and other issues. So we're going to continue this conversation after the break.
On Mark Dolan tonight in The Big Question, following the airing of a shocking GB News documentary, I'll be asking, will we ever learn the lessons from the grooming gang scandal? We'll be joined by ex-top cop Maggie Oliver, who exposed the scandal, and filmmaker Charlie Peters. We've got the queen of US showbiz, royal and political reporting, Kinsey Schofield, plus my all-star panel, tomorrow's papers, my take at 10, and we kick off with my big opinion. We're live at 9.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
There you are. Where have you been? Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. On Sunday, GB News will bring you an exclusive interview with the chair of the Education Select Committee, Robin Walker, who sat down with Gloria De Piero. He lays out his number one priority, which is childcare.
Challenge for every family, and it's a challenge which is stopping many women and some men from being able to continue with their careers. That, to me, is a problem for the whole of government. It's a problem for the Treasury, it's a problem for all of government, as to how we can help people to be able to do that. But also, having been the schools minister, I've seen really the benefit of the early years and the need for early years education for children when they arrive in school. So this is the reason why, when I was campaigning to become chair of the committee, I said childcare will be the number one issue that we want to look into. We've since launched the inquiry, and I'm looking forward to taking more evidence as part of that. It strikes me there's a lot to be done to make sure we better support parents and children.
You can watch the full interview on Gloria Meets. That's the show that looks at the people behind the politicians every Sunday at 6 p.m. OK, now, our Great Britons tonight raised awareness of men's mental health issues. And staying on that theme, my next guest is a hugely successful musician who also dedicates much of his energy to supporting men through crises in their lives. Trey Lowe is a music producer and songwriter, part of the award-winning band Architects, behind big-selling and streaming hit Body Groove. He has worked with Usher, Justin Timberlake and Whitney Houston, but more recently he has made the leap to mentoring and thrown his weight and passion behind a campaign called More Than Men. Trey Lowe joins me now. Great to have you here. Thanks for coming along.
No problem, no.
Tell me, first of all, to give it all context, your own story, because you've had struggles along the way.
Yeah, I mean, when I was 15, I was paralysed during a
routine appendectomy, and I literally came out of that. I was given the antidote to that, and nothing was the same for me. I had this strange sensation where it felt like the room was like moving around. It was like a dreamlike sensation, and it carried on all the way. Age 25, I got into a pop band, and I had to navigate this space. Imagine 1 minute you're on top of the pops, the next minute you're getting your brain scan. So it really got me into the world of how do you actually show up in life as a man powerfully, yet dealing with the kind of mental health challenges of being unwell and dealing with stuff. Very, very powerful experience for me.
And were you keeping it to yourself?
Absolutely. And it was on two reasons. It's not just being a man, it's also being a black man, because, you know, I was well aware of the stats in terms of black men being sort of shoved in mental places in terms of like schizophrenia, etc. So I learned quickly as a man and as a black man, do not share too much about what you're dealing with and just kind of wear a mask. Like everything's okay. Don't let too many people know. And it was a very, very challenging time.
Gosh, so you really felt there would be serious consequences were you to venture that you were suffering?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't think society is necessarily geared up to have men share authentically about what they're going for. So I learned quickly, you know, for instance, my parents walked me in the room and then the, you know, doctor will say to me, have you been actually taking anything when my parents went in the room? So I learned very quickly, just keep quiet about what you're dealing with. Just suck it up, almost like as a man, you know, don't complain too much, otherwise people won't take it too seriously.
And then, of course, you're a musician, and then it's tinnitus that starts to play an overweening part of your life.
Yes, that was one of the things I had. So I came out of this issue that I had in hospital, and I had tinnitus, had derealization, I had head pressure, and all of them, to look at me, you would never tell that I had it. So I had to really navigate dealing with this stuff, and no one could actually see that I was dealing with. And tinnitus was one of the hardest ones because, of course, as a musician, I mean, can you imagine having tinnitus and trying to navigate the world? So it's just really learning to deal with the mental health side of it, not sharing it with everyone and just suffering in silence, really.
And you must, for people who were looking on at, you would think that you just had what they wanted.
Yeah.
You're a musician, you're talented, you've got success, you know, you've got that level of adulation, but all the time inside your head you're thinking, but it's hell in here.
And that, you know, the funny thing about the music business as well, it's like, you know, you're on this pedestal and it seems like your ego and stuff would allow you to shine, but it's actually the opposite things that happen. Do you know, suddenly you feel like all your insecurities are amplified. So every insecurity I had was actually amplified by that success, but yet you've got to go up and sharp as though everything's okay. Very, very challenging.
So at what point and after how long did you, I don't know, step into mentoring? When did you decide that you weren't just going to deal with your own demons, but you were going to exercise them for other people?
Good question, because for me, I learnt real quickly, suffering must have a meaning. And I know it sounds crazy to say that, but there is a reason why we suffer, and I think we suffer in order to make a difference in the lives of other people. So I quickly learned, I've been given this suffering for a reason. If I can navigate it, I can teach others. Because even with tinnitus, I have people who would call me up and say, Troy, I'm really suffering with it. And I had to have them navigate through what was a very, very challenging condition. So I thought, I could actually use my pain to make a really big difference in the lives of other people. So it was a very natural progression to go from being a musician to being a mentor that actually impacted other people's lives.
Tom, well, like Andrew, you've both been on this couch with me, you know, numerous occasions, and we've often had guests come in and talk. What strikes me is how often it's trauma and hardship overcome is the making of people in so many ways. You know, what if people have the demon inside? Once they confront it, it has a great benefit having had that and confronted it.
And it's also people in the public eye as well, isn't it? So what's great, if you prick me, do I not bleed? If you tickle me, do I not laugh? And you work on that sort of premise. It is extraordinary.
Yeah, but what really interests me, though, at what point, though, do people, as you say, have often these hidden traumas, hidden disabilities, do they come forward and talk about them? I mean, I grew up in foster care. My father committed suicide. I left school with no qualifications. It's only in the last 10 years I've been able to talk about that journey. It's why I'm involved in a charity that supports care leavers, for example. You're doing something very similar here, where for many years you almost sort of have to hide that trauma. And what, in the case of tinnitus, it's like a disability that you're having to deal with in your profession. And I say that because we sort of live in a world now where people look cynically at those who say, "Oh, well, you're playing the victim card. You're trying to get a career progression." And I've got to be honest, sometimes I've got some sympathy with that view because I sort of, I don't think people should be defined by their childhood, by their background, by what happened in their family, no more than you should be defined other than for being a fantastic pop star. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And so, you know, it's that balance. When you advise people, how do you advise them to be obviously authentic and honest and upfront? But the truth is, people are often discriminated against for some of these mental illnesses.
The thing is, it's about being authentically straight with yourself and what's actually going on, isn't it? It's really easy to just, not take it too seriously. You have to think, you know what, if I don't deal with this, who is going to deal with it for me? So you then have to just find a way to navigate it and share authentically. And for men, it's just such a challenge for men to do that.
What is the ethos of this? I mentioned More Than Men. What is that?
So More Than Men came from a room that I ran on Clubhouse. It was during the lockdown, and it was about giving men a voice to share what they were dealing with. That was all it was about. And, even when we started the room, the amount of people that tried to shut the room down because they're like, men, it's all right for men. You guys are, all right, patriarchy, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, men are dealing with stuff. The amount of people whose relationships broke down during that time. So it was just giving men a chance to share what was going on for them. And that's why one of our first focus is relationships, because for men, dealing with relationships was impossible for men to deal with the breakdown of it. I think something like 75-80% of relationships breakdowns are initiated by women. And for men, it was really, really challenging to deal with that. These were strong men. Strong men dealing with, wow, I've just lost my kids and I've lost my wife, and some men were suicidal. Some men were Navy SEALs. It was crazy to think about what men deal with and what they had to deal with in silence,
It does make it worse, doesn't it, when you're in the public eye or you're a Navy SEAL because you're supposed to be big and butch and not have these feelings. What advice do you give people?
The first one is just be authentic about what's going on. You have to be. Be really authentic about what's going on and how it's actually impacting your life. That's the first thing. The second thing, I think, for men is actually to find other men to be with. So More Than Men is about brotherhood, letting men share with other men, because it's not always that safe for men to share with women, Men are encouraged to be, vulnerable, etc. But for men, that sounds like weak. Oh, my God, my armour's going to come off. So find other men that you can share with, be authentically straight, and do the work. I always do this. Rather than doing that, do this. What can I be responsible for? How can I grow? How can I change the situation?
Where can people find you? Where can people find More Than Men and make contact?
So www.morethanmen.com. Please get in touch with anything that you've been dealing with, that you're finding it really challenging to navigate in your life, for men. Please definitely get in touch.
Excellent stuff. Trello, thank you very much. Thank you so much for coming in. Couldn't be a more important issue to talk about.
Good to see you.
Excellent. Thank you. And we'll maybe stay in touch and hear more about it.
Absolutely.
Great. OK, another break is upon us. Now, to mark National Apprenticeship Week, we'll be speaking to someone who has made the most of such a scheme and is now a highly trained butcher. Always wanted to be a highly trained butcher, and I say that sincerely. Those are the knife skills I want. See you shortly.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Now, a subject genuinely close to my heart is that of apprenticeship. I think an apprenticeship is just a wonderful opportunity. And this week, just past, has been National Apprenticeship Week. It makes so much sense to me to ensure time-honoured skills and professions are passed from generation to generation. And then there's the obvious point that training in practical skills is for many young people far more appealing than the thought of academia, which is so readily pushed at everyone now. So my final guest tonight is a prime example of apprenticeship and the success therein. Mia Tamburini is now a level 3 advanced butcher, skills that I can only envy. Hi. Thank you for joining us. No, it's lovely. Seriously, I'm not blowing smoke here. I really value the very idea of apprenticeship. Congratulations and well done.
Thank you.
What does it mean to be a level 3 advanced butcher? What can you do?
It means a lot, personally. I can, so I started with my level 2 retail butchery. That's sort of teaching you the basics, how to do, like, breakdown of full carcasses. Level 3 is more to do with, like, management, running your business, looking into, like, food standards, a bit more, like, general safety of food management.
What attracted you? I mean, male or female, I'm not sure how many people think instinctively of going into the butchery trade. What was it for you?
I actually started on a Saturday as a Saturday girl. A dear friend of mine is actually a butcher who actually was in my trainer, Crosby Management Training. She got me started on a Saturday and I was at sixth form and I just didn't feel it was the right path for me. Really found a passion that I hadn't felt for quite a long time at school. And I just decided, I think this actually could be quite a good career path. And
how was it, when you were confronted? How do they break you into it? You say you can break down a whole carcass.
Yeah.
What do you start with? Do you start with a little rabbit? And then work up? What do you do with you?
So you just think, you learn about the general anatomy itself of the animal. You're working with... I have personally worked with some of the best butchers in the UK. And I think that you just... Working in the environment with the shop, you pick up day to day, how to just do general things within the trade itself, I suppose. So...
Yeah. Tom, it's dear to your heart as well, isn't it? The whole concept of, within your education remit,
Absolutely, yeah. In terms of my day job, and of course National Apprenticeship Week's been around, I think, 16 years now. And it's important, isn't it, as a country, Neil, that we do celebrate these wonderful success stories, because actually for so many years now the narrative, and we're all guilty of it, you know, that success is somehow a clutch of GCSEs and A-levels and off you go to university and you're going to earn all this money when you graduate. Well, of course, that sort of perspective has broken down. Yes, it's the right route for some, it's not for others. And what I'm really passionate about is that we have a post-compulsory education and skills system in this country that meets the needs of 100% all of our young people. You know, Switzerland sends 2/3 actually of its young people from school into quality apprenticeships. We've just heard of a fantastic apprenticeship here. Frankly, in those areas of skill and mastery and competence, I think you qualified a year ahead of time as well, didn't you? So you passed your endpoint assessment. That's just like, you know, passing your driving test 6 months early or something. So great credit to you. It just shows how brilliant you were with the mastery of those skills. But the truth is, we're not opening up enough opportunities for young people who want to go through that route. UCAS, which is the university sort of central register, opens about 700,000 accounts every year for young people, Neil. 300,000 of them say, I want to do a degree apprenticeship. I'd rather do the learning and earning route rather than do the, what I call pay and pray route, where you borrow £54,000 off the government over 3 years and you're not sure you're going to get a job paying more than national minimum wage at the end of it. So, you know, I've had these discussions with the skills minister. We've got to do more, I think, in this country to open up more routes, but particularly those skilled learning and earning routes, so that we're not saddling young people, a generation of young people, with debt.
Are you learning and earning now? Have you now got a job in butchery?
Yes, so I've been employed since I started my level 2.
That's the thing, yeah. Employed from day one, aren't you?
Yeah, so,
yeah. So, you know...
And obviously veganism and the rest is on the march, but is butchery as a trade, there's still plenty of work out there for someone with your kind of skills and aptitudes?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Obviously, veganism, it is happening, but I think it's just... the way the world is going, you know, it's just a big change that's happening. But I very much believe that, you know, it will be around for years, because it's a thing that has been around for years, and it will continue to be like a growing thing and something that people will support for
Andrew, it really inspires me genuinely to hear stories like this. Because that one-dimensional approach, as Tom's talking about, with education and further education, it only appeals to or it should only, why wouldn't it just appeal to a narrow band?
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right.
For the rest of that rainbow of colours of jobs and fulfilling ways to make a living, apprenticeships should be by far
it's brilliant, and we were discussing this in the break. There's so much going on in the break as well. But what I love about it is that if you do something you're really passionate about, you'll never do a day's work in your life.
Yes.
And I do think that the more people can get exposed to real jobs with a career path as well. I mean, it's a brilliant testimony to you. And you had the battle scars as well, you were telling us. So you've done quite well with it. How many, I mean, in terms of women, because you don't normally associate butchery, or maybe it's changed as a profession, how many women are on your apprenticeship route as well? Do you know what the percentages are? Do you see many other female butchers?
I'm not sure on the percentage of how many women are actually enrolled on the apprenticeship scheme, but I have worked with some of the highest qualified butchers, and they are women.
Good.
So I probably know about 5 women that are qualified butchers, but you still get people coming in the shop saying, oh, you know, it's really great seeing a woman in here, and that it is seen more. And I think the fact that the public are supporting women, you know, come in and they give me really good criticism and they love to have a chat with me.
What's a good criticism? What's a good criticism of a butcher?
It's good to see a woman in a butchery.
Yes, okay, that's good.
But yeah, I mean, it's... it's definitely
is it
there.
not, though? As Andrew's saying, is it not a masculine environment? Yeah. You know, a butchery business or a butcher shop, is it not a predominantly masculine trade? Or are you saying that there's plenty of women in that as well?
I think it is. Yes, it is seen as being a more masculine trade, and there are still more men in the trade compared to women, percentage-wise. But I think, you know, the women that are in it are very strong. We're qualified with...
You're an inspiration, Mia, honestly. I'm going to have to get to the end of the show now, but thank you so much for coming in. That's all from me on Neil Oliver Live tonight. My thanks, as always, to my panel, Tom Buick and Andrew Eborn. Don't go anywhere, because coming right up is a GB News special report.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. We've seen temperatures a good few degrees above average throughout Saturday, and that is set to continue into Sunday as well. It's due to high pressure being situated to the south of the UK.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi,